Okay, everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can put together your own custom palette. And I'm doing it here with gouache. So I'm going to explain what I have going on my paper here. On this one, I decided that I'm going to make a high chroma palette, something that I don't always work with. I tend to have a lot of browns and other neutrals on my palette for basically convenience, but high chroma is something that people really like to work with, and that just means, if you're not familiar, really saturated colors, things that are tend to be more in the primary color space, but doesn't necessarily have to be. So what I did here, I took a circle to kind of represent what's going to be our color wheel as we know it, and so we got one part here. Primaries separated equally from each other. So we got the primary yellow that's going to go here, primary blue, and primary red. So first thing we're going to do, I have all of my gouache here in front of me, and we're going to try and determine what would be the closest to a primary yellow. And what I also like to do, just as a rule of thumb, is to have a representation of a warm and cool version of each of the primaries. So that's what we're going to target first. And I would say that I have this cadmium yellow light, which is going to be our cool yellow. And I have gamboge, which is going to be our warm yellow there. So warmer means skewing more toward red, and cooler skewing more toward blue. So this is all very much simplified, but that's how we tend to understand these the best. So next is a primary red. I would say cadmium scarlet is going to be more of my warm red. And then we got a lot of different choices for a cool red here. So what do we have here? We got rose, we got magenta, alizarin crimson, even quinacridone violet is kind of in that range too. So I also even have this peony, but that's probably a little bit too much on the cool side. So out of these, alizarin crimson is a little bit less chroma than the other ones because I think it veers toward a darker, less saturated violet. So we got quinacridone, rose, and magenta. I would say rose, and I'll do a couple little swatches here later so I could show you what these are all supposed to look like. So I would say that rose is the closest to just like a cool pure red. And so we could also go back in and find colors that are warm and cool secondaries as well, but let's focus on the task at hand. We got primary blue, cobalt blue, and then we got a lot of different choices here. If we want blue is a little bit more tricky because cobalt blue is probably somewhere the closest to a primary blue that we have. So we can go a few different routes. Let's check out our ultramarine blue. We got this color that's a pure blue, which is what Holbein calls this. And let's see what else we got. We got horizon blue. We got this Turner sky blue. Horizon blue again is going to be something that's a little bit lower chroma because it's a little bit lighter than the other one. So when you make a pure color such as like cobalt blue and make it darker or lighter, you're skewing it more towards white or black, therefore desaturating it. So that's why I'm kind of rejecting these lighter colors for now. You can always put them back in if you want to, but so from here, ultramarine blue is a little bit darker, so I'm going to take that one out. So what we're left with is sky blue, which is kind of a warm phthalo, and then this pure blue, which is seems to be a little bit cooler than our sky blue. So let's determine that cobalt blue is going to be our blue that skews a little bit toward violet, and then we got sky blue, which veers a little bit toward green. So now let's, from here, we can't just decide to take one color per secondary, but how about we try and find some warm and cool secondaries? So let's start with our orange. So cadmium orange is going to be our purest orange we have here. And you know, in my case here, I don't have anything that I would consider a cool orange. The closest thing that I would get to something like that is if I wanted to do like a Naples yellow, which is going to be closer to yellow, but it doesn't really fit in between gamboge and cadmium orange, so I'm going to reject that. Another thing that we can possibly consider is going with a brown, such as a burnt sienna, because that's going to be somewhere in between red and orange. However, it's very much less chromatic than any of the other colors that we have here, so we're going to set that one aside as well. That doesn't really leave us much of anything, so for this demonstration, I'm just going to go and use one orange. And if you decide that, you know, after a while you're using these colors here and you decide, you know what, I'm missing a color that would have helped me in that color range. So that's when you can decide to add more to this palette. So that's what's interesting and useful about doing this exercise, is you can figure out what you want to pinpoint for your own personal use. So, okay, next we got our green. So we got a lot of choices here. Being primarily a landscape painter, I tend to use a lot of different greens here. So if we want to stick with our highly chromatic palette, we gotta look at our choices here. So naturally, I'm going to gravitate toward this spring green to maybe be my most pure green. However, that's a fairly warm green. And leaf green is a color I love to use, but it's less chromatic because it's lighter. So I'm going to set it aside for now, although I may just decide that I want to use it no matter what, even if it goes against our principles here slightly. But we also have leaf green. It's from Turner, and let's see how that compares to the spring green. I would say that actually this leaf green from Turner is more of a pure green. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this here for now. I may decide I want to use the spring green instead. But we also have this Cascade green, which looks like from the bottle, or from the tube, I mean, that it's going to be like a nice, really cool saturated green, but it's actually more of a earthy, somewhat warm, dark green. So it doesn't really fit our bill, even though it looks like a lovely color. I do want to try it with other things, but it's not really going to fit in this palette for us now. It could totally fit in an earthy palette. So that leaves us with leaf green, spring green, and jade. So the jade is going to be a cool blue that actually is probably going, or bluish green that's actually probably going to fit way more over here in this spectrum. And so that leaves spring green to be our pure secondary green, and leaf green somewhere in the in between those. So last but not least, let's go with our violets. And again, I have so many different choices here. How did I end up with so many different types of of violets here. So we got Wisteria, which is a brand new color from Daniel Smith. We got Alizarin Crimson, Edo Violet, which is a Iridori line of Holbein colors. We also got this Peony, which is like a pretty similar to Alizarin Crimson. And then we got also Lavender. So again, for our purposes, Lavender, Wisteria are going to have to be relegated to the side for now, because we got Lilac, which is probably very similar to some of these other colors as well. So for the same reasons that we setting aside the other lighter colors, we're going to do that for this one as well. And then the same, Alizarin Crimson, Peony it's the same problem but different versions of it, which leaves us now with looking at Quinacridone Violet. It's a very dark, warm violet. We got Magenta, which is a somewhat dark, warm violet as well. Got Brilliant Violet, which is probably somewhere in between the Magenta and Quinacridone and this Edo Violet, which is like a cool, deep violet. So we want a warm and cool violet. We could just go with this Edo Violet and Magenta. So is that enough to cover? I'm kind of torn between Magenta, Brilliant Violet, and Edo Violet. So let's run a couple tests here. By tests, I mean let's do some swatches. Just gonna put a little tiny bit of color here. The Edo Violet. Just add it to the side here. Swatch number 1. Number 2, try our Brilliant Violet. Binder kind of coming out of that. There we go. Try the swatch. It's really runny. End up getting like kind of a runny tube. You can try and kind of mix it by squeezing the tube until you feel like you get some version of the pigment being mixed back into the tube. So it's like kind of separated out. It's been hasn't really been used very often, so at least lately. So try and remedy that. All the water out of our brush here. That down. Okay, so you can see that's a lovely color, but significantly warmer. I think lighter in tone than that Edo Violet. Do the same with this Magenta just to be safe. So that is a much warmer color than either of those. Look how different. They're still in the violet family, but they are much different than each other. And then just to compare it to the rose, because we want to determine if rose or magenta is a better color for this palette. Okay, now that rose definitely belongs closer to red than any of these other colors by far. So let's keep our rose where it is. And let's decide that we want both brilliant violet and where'd it go? And magenta, because look at how much more saturated these colors both are than Edo Violet, which I do love this color. It's a great, like, kind of a earthy purple. And then magenta, or not magenta, quinacridone violet isn't one I use that often anymore, but it's a nice kind of dark color, but we're staying away from anything like that for now. So this is going to be our high chroma palette. So now that we added our paints to our color wheel here, I tried to approximate where on the color wheel I thought these went. Doesn't necessarily have to be perfect for this, but I think it gives us a good idea of what our colors are going to do for us on the color wheel. So as you can see, it's a very sort of standard high chroma palette that we were able to make out of the colors in front of us. So what did we figure out here? So one thing I discovered was that I actually miscalculated the color temperature, meaning where these are in relation to each other. It's kind of how I think of color temperature in this situation. But the Spring Green by Daniel Smith was actually warmer, meaning closer to yellow, than the Leaf Green from Turner. Even though you look at their paint tubes, and the Spring Green definitely looks cooler from the label than the Turner Design Leaf Green. So that is a reason that you do want to do some of these color tests before deciding that that's going to go on your palette. And a couple other things I noticed is just in paint consistency, the Daniel Smith seems so much more highly pigmented than the Turners just overall. We got our cobalt blue, our spring green. So far, those are the only Daniel Smiths that make the cut for this palette. So if we look at our color wheel and what we decide is overall warm and overall cool, I would divide this space into cools. I'm putting cools in quotes because they're only cool relative to this side of our color wheel, not that they are necessarily inherently cool or warm colors. So this is very broad stroke here. We are deciding that these are our warm colors on this side of our color wheel, and these are the cools. So it seems like my colors at my disposal in the high chroma palette are a lot. I have a lot more high chroma cools than high chroma warms. So that's something to take into consideration next time I need new paints. Do I find myself painting warmer or wanting to paint warmer? Then I'm going to go try and find some colors that can fill in the space, all these gaps. So as you can see here, I have green and warm blue really well covered. I have cool red really well covered. And remember all those rejected colors? Those were a lot of cool reds and warm violets. So I would say that Edo Violet would probably fit right here. if I wanted to put that into our palette. If I find myself painting a lot of things that have different types of cool reds and warm blues in it, then I may decide that I want to put a violet in there. But I would say that right now, if there was anything that needed more in it, it would be this side of our color palette. So that's a pretty enlightening thing going on for me right now. And so one more thing before we move on to our next phase is deciding how these colors are going to interact with each other. And what I mean by that is, how am I going to modify them? Am I going to be pretty basic about it and just use white and black to modify these colors? I mean, you can. That's a perfectly valid way to work if you're going to use a very much a value scale to change the colors. But there's so much more to color to learn and discover when we make these colors interact with each other. So we can try and discover what sort of colorful grays, darks, and what kind of darks we can create by mixing these with each other. So that's what we're going to do next. Let's go ahead and move on to the next stage of testing these colors, which is going to be creating swatches.